Gage shifted his heavy pack as he strode along the Huckleberry Ridge Trail, his boots automatically following the familiar path to the family hunting cabin. The trail rose in steep switchbacks from the Buffalo River, then ran along a meandering limestone bluff overlooking a deep valley that cut through the Ozark Mountains, following the river all the way to his hometown of Clearwater in the distance. When he reached the top of the switchbacks, Gage paused to catch his breath. The crisp air made his breath come out in clouds. He stood gazing at the fall colors as the sun's last rays lit up the trees. Gage had taken that first whitetail buck not too far from here, although it seemed like a lifetime ago now. This reunion with his brother Seth and their best friend Perry was long overdue, but Gage had no idea what to expect. He and Seth had always gotten along better than most brothers usually did, and Perry had been like an older sister to him ever since they'd met back in grade school. Still, after high school, he simply left town without saying a word. He had to get out. As time went on, guilt had just driven him farther away. After a few years, they had all reconnected online. Eventually, they made a tentative plan to meet up at their favorite spot. This gathering had been a long-standing tradition, until Gage had broken it. They'd been coming out to the old hunting cabin every year since grade school. Gage always cooked, Perry always ran a tabletop role-playing game called Gods and Dragons, and Seth always snuck moonshine out of Grandma's workshop. Gage reached the turnoff to the cabin, and his steps faltered for a moment as nerves overcame him. He rolled his shoulders beneath the straps of his pack and turned to follow the smaller trail away from the bluff and up a small rise. An icy breeze cut through Gage's jacket as the sun sank below the horizon. He hadn't expected to still be hiking in the dark, but he'd gotten a late start and the cabin was a full day's hike from the trailhead. He'd be there soon enough, and then he'd be plenty warm. Perry, ever the firebug, would have a raging bonfire going. They'd often called Perry's bonfire a beacon of Minas Tirith, since it could be seen for miles. He'd almost keeled over when he found out she'd actually become a firefighter for the Forest Service. Gage smelled wood smoke. Then the flickering light of a fire filtered through the trees. Pushing through the low-hanging tree branches crowding the trail, he paused in the shadows at the edge of the clearing. On the far side, the old log cabin sagged on its stone foundation. A rickety-covered porch ran across the front, stacked high with firewood for the cast-iron stove. The rusty spikes of an old hay rake protruded from a drift of dead leaves along the side of the cabin. The moss-covered cedar shakes on the roof had seen better days. 2 backpacks and his brother's compound bow hung from hooks that jutted from the porch railing. Gage had hammered those hooks out of old railroad spikes in their grandma's workshop. Seth and Perry sat at a picnic table near the roaring fire, chatting in low voices. Perry wore camouflage tights, a puffy black vest over a fleece shirt, and a pink camo hat with her dark brown ponytail pulled through it. Gage's older brother looked relaxed, with his long legs stretched out under the table. Gage wasn't short at nearly 6 feet tall, but he had always been jealous of Seth, who'd been 6'5" ever since he was only 14 and had inherited their dad's lanky but powerful build. They'd both run cross-country, but Gage had never managed to beat his older brother's school records. Seth wore his usual dark green and brown jacket and pants, and he'd grown a long, scruffy beard to go with his black mop of hair. Gage had the same dark hair and beard, but kept them more closely trimmed. His friends looked cheerful, but Gage was still hesitant about joining them. He shook his head. Why was he so nervous? The wind gusted, sending sparks soaring skyward, as if urging him forward. He was about to join his friends when he caught a flash of color out of the corner of his eye. It wasn't hunter orange, as he might expect to see this time of year, but red and wispy, like a red silk scarf drifting in the wind. He waited for it to reappear, but it was gone, vanished without a trace. He turned back to see Seth standing, silhouetted against the fire, looking in his direction. You gonna join us, or what? You've been standing there for 10 minutes. Gage had forgotten how sharp Seth's eyes were.
Gage!